Welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and Murder Mondays, when authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore, a debut crime writer, a journalist and a national convener for Sisters in Crime, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. Before I introduce Heather Rose, we acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Heather, welcome. We're so thrilled that you're with us today.
Really, thank you. It's such a privilege. And I would like to say that I'm coming to you from Lutruwita, the traditional land of Tasmania, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging also.
Oh, thank you, Heather. You're an award-winning author, public speaker, writing mentor and a teacher of creativity and imagination, but not always known for crime writing. Your work spans literary fiction, magical realism, political fiction and fantasy, and you have collected several major awards along the way, including a Stella Prize and the Christina Stead Prize. 2 of your 8 novels are in the crime genre, The Butterfly Man, which won the Sisters in Crime 2006 Davitt Award for Best Novel, and now Bruni, which is shortlisted for this year's Davitt Awards. Welcome, Heather. Before we get to the questions, can you please give us your elevator pitch for your latest novel, Bruni?
Thank you, Karina. Well, Bruni, it begins with a very large infrastructure project being blown up. Enter Astrid Coleman, conflict resolution specialist for the UN, who is brought home by her brother to settle down the Tasmanian people after this terrorist event. Astrid is somewhat of an ambiguous character. She left Tasmania when she was 20. Her brother is now the Premier of Tasmania and her sister is the leader of the opposition. Her father has dementia and her mother has cancer. So coming home is not just as simple as settling down the Tasmanian people. She comes into the maelstrom of family, and that's how it begins.
I love those family dynamics. It's like a whirlwind, isn't it?
Yes.
Let's get to the questions. What is your writing routine?
Well, ideally, I am at my desk by 9 o'clock in the morning and I work till 3 or 4 in the afternoon, depending on, the day. I like to also often write late at night. So sometimes after dinner, I'll go back and work into the late hours, sometimes because that's the quietest time for my mind and new thoughts will have come since that process through the day. And then I like to take Fridays off just to do admin and, other responsibilities. I tend to work through weekends as well, but it depends. These days I'm a little bit more flexible. My children have grown up and I only now have one back at home who is studying. So, I have a little bit more flexibility than I used to. I used to start work at 9 o'clock at night. In fact, that's how I wrote Butterfly Man. And also I had a little retreat house up on the mountain. And for those of you who've read The Butterfly Man, you'll know where that house is because I basically used the location of that house for Henry's house. So it was right on the mountain. I just rented a little tiny cottage in the freezing cold. And Bruni was written right here in my house here. And when I walk the beach, which I tend to do at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, once I finish for the day, the view down the Derwent River is the view that we see the Pacific Gull take off from and travel down and through to the Doncaster. And in fact, that's where I first had the idea, because when you look down the Derwent River here, you look in across to Bruni, North Bruni and the Doncaster Channel, and there was a cloud bank, a beautiful cloud bank with a huge spear of light that made it look like there was an enormous suspension bridge. And I thought, I wonder what would be going on if there was a really huge bridge being built to Bruni. And that's where the novel really began.
Fabulous. How do you write about violence?
I think it's really hard to write about violence, and I must say I think it's hard to write about conflict, even though that seems to be the essential mechanism in any kind of novel and indeed in theatre. And it's that we need to have conflict in order for our characters to come under pressure and grow and change and have their arc. But I think it's very difficult, and violence is particularly difficult. And I know some people are really suited to that. They like that. I always find it hard in real life, and I find it hard in fiction. So I don't tend to read any violent crime, and in fact, I've read very little crime fiction. But I think that there's also a way of discussing violence in a way that is within the character that makes it much more integral to the story than simply a lot of blood and a body on the floor and the ramifications of violent crime. So whilst I did obviously do that in The Butterfly Man, I was much more interested in the inner violence in my characters than I've been about the kind of violent actions that people do to each other.
Yeah. Tell us something not in your book about a main character.
Oh, what a lovely question. Well, for example, I know that Dan, our love interest in Bruni, is a descendant of the Aboriginal people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And it didn't feel appropriate to bring that into this particular novel, but I always thought if there was a sequel, that would be a big part of that story.
Yeah.
But I just didn't feel, there's a lot in Bruni, as you know, Karina, so I felt like there was way enough for readers to take hold of. And there is, as you know, an underbelly of, well, it's a metaphor in so many ways for what happened to the Aboriginal people. So I didn't want to be overt in any way about that.
Yeah. What's the scariest thing in your novel?
That it's mostly true.
Yeah.
I mean, I did an enormous amount of research, and I interviewed very, very high-profile, significant people, everyone from people in the military, senior people in government, both federally and also internationally. I interviewed experts in the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese Communist Party ideology. I interviewed economists. I interviewed people who've been responsible for, major strategy in foreign investment. I really went to town on my interviews, and I was really disturbed. I had an idea that it was bad, but I had no idea that we had left the door open in Australia to the kind of investment that is going to undermine our agricultural security, our water security. And that's not about any particular foreign government. It's about the fact that the Australian government, as you well know, Karina, is the one that needs to be taking responsibility for this, and they're not.
Yeah. It's a real hot potato issue at the moment too in the news right now, isn't it?
Yes, and even the crazy thing of the cruise ships, coming up in the book, and that if doing my research, that's how that came about. I had no idea we had such lax security around, tourists coming into the state. Possibly, with illnesses, we don't have a hospital system that would allow for that. And, this pandemic was just waiting to happen and run wild around the world because of very lax security in those ways.
Yeah, frightening. Why is crime so appealing as a genre?
Oh, isn't that wonderful? Well, first of all, it's such a human phenomenon, and I'm personally a great rule breaker. I don't think I'd go as far as Astrid goes, but it's exciting, isn't it, to have characters do things that we couldn't do, and to know things that we couldn't possibly know. And yes, it's there's just a mischievousness to it, I think. For me, at any rate. I mean, not so much with The Butterfly Man. The Butterfly Man felt very serious, and mostly because this was a man at the end of his life and he's trying to come to terms with this crime in the past. But with Bruni, I did feel very mischievous through most of the writing of it. In fact, I would type away and I'd read back what Astrid had said, and I'd think, I can't say that. And then I'd think, yes, I can. Astrid said, It's like having a naughty imaginary friend. So, I think that's one of the delicious things about crime is that we get to play. And in fact, about writing, we get to play with other realities and other people. And, you know, I trained in theatre through my teenage years, and I've got a great love of theatre. And it's a bit like that for me. It's a bit like playing characters for me.
Yeah, fabulous. What's the best way to dig yourself out of a bad plot hole?
Yes. I co-write a children's series that I write under the pen name of Angelica Banks with Danielle Wood. And she's an excellent plotter. And I tend to be the pantser. You know, I run by the seat of my pants, and she's the plotter. And over the years of working together, we've sort of found a middle ground. We're much more aware now of plot. And so what I think is most important is trust, because there are things that come along. I always think of writing, we all have a metaphor for this, us writers, but one of the things that occurs to me as a writer is that it's like a kind of psychic orienteering. I find I get signals and signs and little bits of dialogue I'll overhear, or I'll find a bit of information, or something will happen on the news, especially with Bruni. It was fascinating having, you know, I had to immerse myself in current affairs, but everything seemed to be coming in to support me in that. And what I notice is that whilst I might not know why that thing is in a plot, by the time we get to the end, it's always worked itself out. And in fact, there are things I can never see, because I start with the beginning. So I got that first scene of the enormous bridge. Yeah. And then not long after, I got the large event that happens very close to the end. And when I saw images of what that had done, I thought, I don't know what happens now, but I just have to find my way. And so, in truth, I was going along knowing that Astrid was a little bit like Henry Kennedy in The Butterfly Man, was an unreliable narrator. But I didn't know why. But seeing it's my 8th novel, I thought, well, I have to trust. I have to trust that there's an inherent intelligence in this character, that she will finally reveal herself to me. And when she did, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I woke from a dream with her saying what she had done. And I sat up in bed and I was like, no. Oh, no. I don't know if I could. I don't know how to write that. You know, I don't know how to write that character. But then you just have to. You have to keep going. You get back down to the page at 9 o'clock in the morning and you keep going.
Yeah. How do you represent, or how do you approach representing diverse communities?
Yes, I'm a great believer in artists having full license to let their imaginations run wild. And if our characters come from diverse backgrounds, all the better, because the world is like that. I will fight to the end to allow us to paint the world as we see it. But I think you have to do very good research. I think you have to be deeply respectful, and also you really need to, you know, I think it was it Hemingway who said that a novel is like an iceberg, and he meant that the characters, you only share a little bit of the characters and underneath is the rest. But for me, all the research is underneath, and the top of it is the novel. And if you're going to depict characters from various backgrounds, as I've done in all my books, you really have to understand the cultural values, you know, religious values, all sorts of things about those characters that are going to be extremely important for you to know, and very little of it gets imparted to the reader other than, I've noticed, in dialogue. Yeah. And if you don't really deeply know, like there's a character in The Butterfly Man, Lily, the woman in The Butterfly Man, Henry's lover, and she is from Vietnam. I read maybe 5 books on the Vietnam War just to have 3 or 4 lines of dialogue for Lily. And it's it's the same with Bruni. I mean, there was such an enormous amount of research in that, and then you find a character that you suspect is a certain way, and you think, well, I really need to understand the history of that character. And if that involves another culture, then you need to do the work more deeply. And I think so much of good writing is about respect for your characters and respect for the world at large too, because no one is simple, no one is straightforward.
Yeah.
We all are complex and we have complex backgrounds. So that's how I approach diversity, just with deep respect.
Yeah, that's lovely. How important is place in your writing?
Oh, I think it's everything. I seem to be very embedded in my island culture, but similarly with Museum of Modern Love, I really immersed myself in New York. I think place is a character in a novel if you let it be. And I'm very connected to nature. So, in fact, I don't really mean to put it in the way that the reader receives it. I've had so much feedback about how beautifully Tasmania is portrayed in Bruni, but I didn't deliberately do that. I literally just looked out the window. And
show off.
No, I know, it's terrible, isn't it? We were walking around free down here, which is just remarkable. And it's again about respect, I think, respect for the writing process, because I don't think your characters come to you just isolated. They live in homes or caves or whatever they live in. They, they have backgrounds, they've got families, they live somewhere. And everyone who lives somewhere is impacted by that somewhere. We are the product of our environment. And I think if you dismiss that, you can get a very hollow feeling in writing. It's rare that a bit of writing can carry itself with no depth to place.
Yeah, fabulous. How much of you is in one of your characters?
All of me is in all my characters. Yeah. It took me a long time to realise that. And I think it was the Butterfly Man that became evident to me, quite honestly. And it was my third novel, and, you're starting to get a bit of a sense of your writing landscape a little, by the third novel, I think. And it just occurred to me that I was deeply in all of them. And, there's a lot of freedom when you realise that, because you realise the breadth of the possibilities, because we are nuanced as human beings, and so different things interest us at different times, and different things inspire us. And the Colemans, I've had the Colemans a really long time, by the way. I first wrote about them when I was 21, and I was doing a short story course in Melbourne, and I wrote this story about a family sitting at the Christmas table, and they were a political family, and there was all this politeness on the surface and all this tension underneath. And at 21, I thought, I don't know how to write these people. I don't know enough about the world. I don't know enough about humans yet. I just don't have the maturity to write this story. And I remember it was called The Throwing Circle, and for some reason or other, that stayed with me as an idea, and this family kept sitting at the table, and every now and again, like once a decade basically, I'd remember them and they'd still be sitting at the table. And when Astrid first turned up at Hobart Airport for me, and she and Maxine drive home, and there's the first family gathering, I thought, oh, I know you people, you're the Colemans. So, I mean, my family's not at all political. No one in my family's ever run for office. But we're very old Tasmanians in the white sense. We go back about 6 or even 7 generations. So I think that as a writer, the possibilities of character are enormous, and being brave. I mean, Bruni was a brave book to write. It felt brave to do it. It felt risky, really risky to write that story and to share that information. And I've certainly been told since that I should be very, very careful and never go to China and never fly into Hong Kong. And so, you know, are all the characters part of me? Absolutely, they're all part of me. And I guess the real dance is to make them both part of you and part of the world, so that everyone can connect with them. And, you know, that's probably the most delicious part about writing, is that it's such an internal and personal process. And yet, you know, if you're lucky, you touch the world with it.
Yeah, definitely. How many drafts do you do before you hand it in?
70. I was watching David Sedaris on Masterclass recently, and he said writing is just rewriting, and it's true. I know other people have said that, but David Sedaris I adore, and it's true. Writing is rewriting, and you know, do the draft as quickly as you can, and then just keep rewriting until it feels like it's flow. And that flow is hard to achieve, as we know. Good writing doesn't come easy, and I don't know anyone who said, "Oh, it was so easy to write that novel."
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's rewriting, and of course, it's all about editing.
Of course. Which leads us to our next question. What is your top writing tip, and what is your top self-editing tip?
Top writing tip is write as if there is no tomorrow. I think so many of us put it off, and, you know, we have novels burning inside us, we have stories burning inside us, we have symphonies, we have plays, we have paintings. You know, we just don't know how long we have. And when that urge takes you, I am the queen of distraction. If there's one thing I know about myself, it's all the ways I distract myself from writing. But somehow or other, I have actually overcome that 8 times. I don't know how I've done it, but if you were to see me, you'd worry about me. But it's so important to seize the moment. When the idea comes, you know, always have a notebook, always have your phone close by if you want to record it. I think it was Picasso who said, only leave unfinished today what you're willing to die having left undone. And I'm a great believer in that. If it takes till 2 o'clock in the morning, just keep going. You know? And there's a fearlessness in that, of course.
Yeah.
But really, I think my number one tip would be learn to be fearless creatively. And my editing tip, you know, it's so important to get the first draft done and not get caught up on the first chapter. I've read many a very polished first chapter that then falls away because not the same amount of dedication was given to those other chapters. It's so important to get the first pass done and then to come back as a reader. And so I am a big believer in putting it away for 2-3 months, 6 months if you can, coming back to it fresh as a reader. And also never give it to anyone who isn't already a very experienced writer or a very experienced reader. Be very clear if you ask for feedback, what sort of feedback you want, because often people will give it to their loved ones early on, and all they really want is for someone to say, brilliant, keep going. Yeah, you're not actually looking for true criticism, you're looking for encouragement. So be very clear before you go about editing. If you're seeking advice from people externally, a very experienced reader, a very experienced writer, and be clear that all I want you to do is tell me I'm doing a really good job. I don't care if you think it's a basket case, I just need encouragement. Or could you really look at the dialogue for me? I'm worried that it doesn't feel right. Or, you know, have I got this character right? Be very clear about what sort of feedback you want, because I watch people be damaged by feedback.
Yeah.
You know, the hardest thing in the world to do is to write a piece of writing we're happy with. Even for me, it's so rare for me to write a piece of writing I'm happy with. So the rewriting, and then there's always a point where I I think of it as snow blindness, where I can no longer see what I've written, and that's the time to give it to another reader and ask, does it work as a story? Is the plot hanging together? Where did you slow down? That's one of my things I ask my early readers is, you know, mark where you slowed down, where you went and made a cup of tea, where you lost momentum in the story, where you got confused. So really asking for very precise feedback, I think, is so critical for writers.
Yeah, that's lovely. Negative feedback is so destructive, isn't it, at the early stage?
People do it unknowingly. So often I hear people who said, oh, yeah, my wife said that, you know, I was just spending too much time writing and I wasn't, you know, how can it take 6 hours a day? And that alone can nearly kill someone.
Yeah.
So we're very sensitive, us writers, and we're bearing our souls.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think some of the worst feedback comes from the people closest to us. So giving it to your husband or wife, your partner, your, you know, your best girlfriend, not necessarily the best person to give it to. Much wiser to wait until you get to that snowblind place and then maybe send it to a professional analyst of some sort. Or, I use my agent as my first reader. Once I've got to that point, I'll send it to her and say, look, tell me what's wrong with it. And my sister is also one of my first readers. She's a really experienced reader, and she loves me and she loves my work. And so she reads it like a real reader will, but she's, you know, she's very, very widely read. So she understands what I'm trying to do, and she'll understand, because she's read all my other work, where I've, you know, done something that just isn't measuring up in some way, and she's always very kind. So, you know, there are very precise people to choose, and yes, I think genuinely the most difficult feedback I've seen my students get is from their partners.
Yeah. And our last question for today, how would you get away with murder?
The first thing that came to mind was that I'm really good at making cake. And I think I'd probably do a good poison. So they'd go out thinking that they were having a fabulous time. And then I wouldn't want it to be painful in any way. I'd like it just to make them feel a little bit like a glass of champagne would feel, and then fall asleep and evaporate, so I didn't have to deal with the body. Because I think that's the worst thing about murder, yeah? I always laugh at that in movies, the difficulty of dealing with the body. So something that made them disapparate.
I love it. Heather Rose, thank you for joining us today on Murder Mondays.
Karina, it's been a delight. Thank you so much.